Hi there, CEHD grad students. This is Nina from the Graduate Student Success Office. Today's Mini Monday workshop will focus on the ins and outs of mental health in grad school. And by ins and outs, I mean this will be a short session. I think this generation, and certainly in recent years, we've talked a whole lot more and have kind of brought mental health to the forefront as well. So in today's session, we're just going to focus on campus resources that could be of use to graduate students, because this is certainly a challenging year. So not only, is the curriculum different, especially if you may have just begun the program and you're still living in your undergraduate years, but even if you've been here for a little bit, and even if you are starting out, maybe you are working part-time or full-time, maybe you have a family to raise, maybe you have a relative that you're caring for, or you have your own health issues. All I'm trying to say is there's just a lot to our lives. We're not just strictly focusing on schools. So those tensions can all add up. And of course, toss in a pandemic and the effects that we've all experienced, it can certainly be a tough year. So let's take a whirl and see what we can talk about today to help you all kind of perhaps prioritize or just reinvest in your mental health. So here we're just going to take a pause and sort of quick quiz yourself, so you don't have to give anyone any answers, but answer these to yourself. If you're reading, as you're reading, I should say, you may already know the answer to some of these questions, but it can be helpful to look at a few questions and just kind of help you gauge how serious your mental health issue might be. The self-assessment is a good way to get really honest with yourself about how grad school might be affecting your particular mental health. Of course, there are many other assessments out there that are more fine-tuned for different mental illnesses, but we're just going to focus just a little bit on just this kind of baseline evaluation. So I'm going to pause here so that you can finish reading and sort of giving yourself some of those scores. So if you've taken a little self-quiz and took it in earnest, and if you disagree with most of these statements, then hey, that's awesome. Congratulations. I'm glad that you feel super good. Even if you disagree with most of the statements, of course, it's just good to keep tabs on your own well-being. Check yourself every week, every month, some number of kind of consistent times per month or per year. If you agreed with most of these statements, then there might be some challenges in your life that are resulting in potentially either an already diagnosed mental illness, which you may very well be aware of, or perhaps you're not or were not aware that you were in the beginning stages of perhaps having a mental illness. Now, again, there's always degrees of severity when it comes to this, but as we continue with this little session, you can find out more about how to find the proper help and treatment so that you don't necessarily feel like you're floundering or being swallowed by all of your obligations. So even though every student is different and the mental health challenges they might face, would be quite different as well. Some mental health difficulties can show up more often among grad students. So it's important to know what to look out for so that it becomes easier to recognize the symptoms and to get help. As we think about just higher education as a whole and some of the ways that we've seen them invest in mental health, a lot of mental health providers on college campuses still believe that there is certainly a gap to be filled in terms of having enough mental health professionals and providers to meet student needs. I think we've all seen that there could be extraordinary wait times to perhaps see a counselor on a more routine basis. As I mentioned at the beginning of the introduction for this quick workshop, COVID-19 notwithstanding and what's happening to us, overall graduate school life is just another hotbed, of activity, and therefore graduate students have an increased risk of anxiety and depression. Tie that in that some of you all may be in very competitive programs, or you have high goals for yourselves and you're trying to hustle and accomplish all of this, so that perhaps when you sometimes don't hit the goal completely, you may feel like a complete and utter failure when in fact you've still accomplished something remarkable. So some of this could just be sort of, personality and tempering your expectations. With our doctoral students, again, that's just a long, long grind between classes to proposals, I should say comprehensive exams to proposals to dissertation. So in this kind of case, doctoral students are also at risk of depression and other psychiatric complications, if you will. And of course, we've seen this enormous increases of graduate students seeking out mental health services. And as we think about your average college campus, being divided between undergraduate and graduate students, it can be quite a bit of a competition again, as we've seen with these resources being so understaffed to some extent. And this can then sometimes feel like you cannot be seen in a timely way. So one way to head off any prospective mental illness, I wouldn't say completely to solve it or to eradicate it, would be to just get a better handle on being able to recognize the signs, and also to be aware of what are some common issues that do affect students. So among graduate students, we tend to find addiction and substance use disorders, of course, depression, as I mentioned on the previous slide, sleeping issues and disorders within, and then of course, stress and anxiety disorders. So with alcohol, it isn't unusual for college students to try new things, alcohol included, but it's also important to note that for some, addiction of substance abuse can be lurking kind of in the wings, waiting to take hold, waiting for the opportune environment and the conditions to capture a student, if you will. So those in the group of addiction will continue to reach for addictive substances, even as it may cause more problems in their life. As you can see with graduate students, we also tend to see the use of Adderall in excessive ways, or Ritalin, or other types of stimulants like that, just so that they feel like they can focus or they need to give it their all. And even though there, may or may not be any kinds of boosts, we're still encountering some aspects of that kind of competitive culture, and that pushes students into abusing these or otherwise not managing their medication well. With depression, again, you may have days where you just feel a fleeting moment of sadness, but depression is one of the most prevalent disorders amongst graduate students and even in the wider population. Those who suffer from it might seem perfectly fine on the outside, but we know that we all try to present our best selves on the outside. But those who are suffering from it, might be completely struggling. The symptoms of depression can include perpetual feelings of sadness or emptiness, losing pleasures in hobbies or spending or not spending time with friends, prolonged trouble with eating or sleeping. And so the underlying cause of depression is thought to be a combination of genetic, biologic, and environmental and psychological factors. So as we think about graduate school, this just being a whole new arena where you feel like you're having to excel. You may be separated from your family. You may be having a hard time adjusting to a new area and to the pace of work. As we think about just the online factor and that we're all kind of separated right now, so none of us are having a proper campus experience and seeing each other. All of those things have the sort of right foundation to result in increases of students presenting with depression. With sleeping, I remember when I was an undergrad student, there was always a group of students, I would say, who were so proud, so pumped when they pull an all-nighter like it's a badge of honor. And as a person who loves sleep, I have never fallen into that club, and I could not imagine that there was something to boast about having stayed up for 24 hours. But with students who have a legitimate inability to sleep, so those with insomnia or other sleeping disorders, these could turn into more serious things such as narcolepsy, sleepwalking, or even restless leg syndrome. All of these things will then, of course, keep you from performing your best in your academics, will keep you from getting the rest you need so that your brain can do what it has to do. And then naturally, some people may compensate this with the use of alcohol or other types of prescription medication. It's all just kind of one giant cycle around that. Anxiety, this is the most prevalent issue we see among students, both graduate and undergraduate. I would say anxiety and depression being the top areas for students in undergraduate and graduate education. So some level of stress and anxiety, is a given. That's just part of how we live life. But when those issues begin to take over a person's life, it might be more than just regular worry about, the next test, or did you do this paper really great? So individuals with stress and anxiety disorders suffer from worries that don't not get better with time. They might feel constantly on edge or have trouble sleeping, suffer from fatigue, or find it impossible to concentrate and feel tense and irritable. Some might even suffer from panic attacks or social anxiety, which means that, with panic attacks, they ultimately may have a hard time leaving their comfort space, their home, to interact with others because it really gives them a tremendous amount of fear. Social anxiety, just being around other people, again, not even COVID withstanding, but just being around different people and having to put on the face, the politeness to engage in some of the pleasantries. This is where individuals with social anxiety may really have a lot of particular issues. And as we, again, I know I keep saying graduate school, competitive time period, this is where we're all trying to do our best. That may or may not be applicable to anyone. But, deep down, as we also think about the impact of social media and the fact that, we may be striving for likes or we want to present a certain image of success, that all can add up to just feeling, less than. So and so's Instagram looks awesome. I can't believe their Facebook account if people are still using it, or, I guess let's say TikTok or Twitter or things like that. So we're always socially kind of comparing and judging. And of course, that has to take its toll because anything that we post, I know from experience for Instagram, it's been tweaked with filters. I've spent time trying to think of the perfect caption, which is why I pretty much abandoned Instagram right now. But all I have to say is I think we all do these activities ubiquitously. So it might also be worthwhile to consider taking a break from some social media. I know that might sound counterintuitive, especially as we are isolated as we are, but if people on the other side are not as encouraging and not as helpful, then it might be a good opportunity to detox. Some of these risk factors I've kind of talked about just inadvertently because I always like to weave a narrative around these things. But as I mentioned earlier, I think, we've come a long way, and there's certainly still a long way to go, but we've become a lot more comfortable about talking about mental health issues and calling them out and helping people get connected. When we think about why the number of graduate students are reporting, a high number are reporting mental health issues, is because there is some destigmatization around that. They feel more comfortable. Campuses have invested in resources to help with mental health. Now, it's still not perfect, but that also helps promote more visibility around mental health issues. The other thing is when we think about just graduate life in general, it's changed also very, very dramatically. Graduate students used to be, for the most part, full-time graduate students. All they did was grad school. So some of those stereotypes we have perhaps about, the graduate programs being a place of weeding out and that we all have to perform our best, or, you're in grad school, so you need to tough it out because you chose to do this kind of mentality. While there are still pockets of that, we also know that the graduate student population has changed. As I mentioned earlier, some of you all are married, have children, are looking after your own parents, are looking after yourself. So you're no longer just living in this box where it's you in grad school. You're living outside of that box where there's a lot of things coming up your way. And so when we think about just the fact that, we are now being open about recognizing that graduate students lead multifaceted lives, and that also means that we have to also recognize that mental health plays a part of that as well. So one way to think about kind of trying to get a handle on your own mental health is self-care. Now, we've heard a lot about self-care. I mean, I can't even pinpoint the year when this word came into like everyday vocabulary. But I've also heard from some students that they, can't necessarily define or explain what self-care is because we just throw it out for everything. So the worksheet you're seeing here, and we're going to make it available on our website as well, was provided to us by the U of L Counseling Center to help students identify, what is soothing to you. As I think about students I've worked with, students who, how do I phrase it? Students who have always had very regimented lives. So you had activities, you had sports, you had music, you had your Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, those kinds of organizations. So students who were, chaperoned and scheduled within an inch of their life, they may not have, their own hobbies. They may still be kind of operating on those old infrastructures, if you will, that were built by their parents. And so when we think about self-care, this is why it's a really unique experience for every student, because you have to kind of know yourself, what helps you relax. So for me, I like exercising. I run about 4 to 5 days a week. The length of those distances varies. Usually I am somewhat disappointed with myself if it's less than 6 miles, That's the kind of the competitive element in me. But if I can't make that mileage on that day, I've learned to just be graceful and let it go. But I also walk pretty much every day of the week. So between the running and the walking, I get a lot of fresh air. I clear my head a lot, and I use that as an opportunity to, connect with podcasts that I like, to listen to music, to leave my house and just walk around my neighborhood. So think about what you like to do. Now, physical exercise may not be your particular go-to. Maybe you do enjoy a good Netflix show, or maybe you are super into yoga or meditative breathing. I had a friend who was really into mindfulness, which is sort of the program, if you will, to sort of center your breathing and your thoughts, and just progressively sort of relax your body until you kind of let that tension go away. Think about things that you like to do when you're, let's say, not in school, when you have a weekend that's potentially, free, or if you may be a parent or a caregiver, maybe a weekend where you are not necessarily free of those obligations, but maybe they're just, you don't have to do as much that weekend. So where can you maybe reclaim a little bit of that time? So of course, you can always have too much of a good thing. So if I was running 7 days a week, of course that opens me up for, injuries and burnout and coming to hate running. So whatever you're thinking about, think about ways that you can, do it in the just right amount, if you will. The other thing that I think we often don't think about self-care is, I've always heard it focused more on the activities, is the people that you surround yourself with. So we always talk about having, a circle of support or having a support network. But that can also sometimes be an area where people may struggle because they may not have as many supportive people in their lives. So think about people in your program, or be it in your family or in your church group if you belong to a faith tradition, so a synagogue or a mosque. That might be a good person to, or persons with whom you can, connect. Think about people who are maybe not helping you live your best life, as my students say. So if there are individuals that are, constantly negative or less than helpful, maybe thinking about limiting the amount of interactions you have there. And then the other thing is limiting negative self-talk. So I mentioned earlier about, my desire to run and how miserable I feel if I haven't, hit my mileage. I'm not training for anything, I will be honest. I just like running a long time. But trying to give yourself that grace, trying to highlight the positive. So maybe I didn't run 6 miles today, but I ran 5, and maybe I did it in a faster time. And even if I did it in a slower time, then you know what? Hey, that's still 5 miles that wouldn't have happened. That's still a lot of good sweating. That's still a lot of good exercise. So you can apply that to things like grades on papers, or maybe if you feel like you have too many things on your plate, focusing on the items where you were successful. Um, and at the same time, sometimes you just have to accept that maybe something didn't go according to plan. So maybe you did get a crappy grade. It is what it is. Meet with your professor, talk about other venues, talk about other options. Don't turn to, alcohol and try to, drink your blues away, or to medication to medicate it away. Try to be more proactive than that, because those are all sort of very insular activities. And again, the grad school is not about trying to make you feel alone, although I think that is still the reputation that may be there amongst some of us and the way that we talk about grad school. But I want to remind everyone that, you are not. And our office is here certainly as one line of defense to help you. So with this worksheet, fill it out, go ahead and put it down to paper. Even if you're like, I already know who my people are and what I like to do, try to push yourself in a new direction. So when you think about things that maybe you normally do, maybe is this a good time to try to do something else? So if you're getting burnt out on just watching a ton of Netflix and making sourdough bread, or whatever else we've picked up through COVID-19, what are some other options that you could look at? Because this is a good time to kind of try to cultivate a different skill set in yourself. Now, this is my general shout out for just the UOFL Counseling Center. This office is awesome. And again, while they may still be kind of working with a lot of students who are definitely in need of their resources, even through COVID, they are still available. So you can click on any of these links, which we'll also make available on our website, because they are doing some telemedicine, meaning that you could use Microsoft Teams or Zoom or the telephone to see a mental health professional. They also offer a lot of different support groups. We're going to look at those in the next slide, so that if perhaps you are not interested in a one-on-one counseling relationship, but you just kind of want to be around other people who share some kind of identity with you, this would then also be a great way. And again, they're all virtual as well. Now, U of L Counseling Center, this is covered through your tuition and fees. There may be some limits on how many sessions you may have, so this will be good to check in through their website. And of course, we'll also post a link to all of the mental health providers vetted by U of L's Counseling Center on our website when we think about the city at large. So these are the support groups I mentioned in the earlier slide. So again, you can see that there's a little bit of everything. I'll draw your attention to the graduate student support group. That is every other Thursday from 3:30 to 4:30. So it's only about 60-minute commitment. Some might be about 90 minutes. The other ones you can definitely take a look at as well, especially if you may identify with those different groups. I want to shout out on the right hand, our office, the Graduate Student Success Office. We have some virtual socials programmed as well. These socials vary from things like these mini Monday workshops to coffee hours to some educational seminars and things like that. So we're trying to kind of work with students with where we're at. You know, you see me stuck in my home, and you all may also be working from different places. So virtual is the word of 2020. So bear in mind as you look at our website as well as these opportunities that you do make sure that you plan for having a fairly decent internet. So this is a very kind of brief and superficial overview of just kind of mental health in general. We've kind of identified the 4 primary areas of mental health issues that affect students. We've talked about why graduate students in particular are sort of susceptible to mental health issues. And we've talked about the campus resource, the primary one, U of L Counseling Services, as an option to seek out some help. I left you guys with the self-care worksheet so that you can kind of think about some ways that if you feel like you may not want to do a more formal counseling interaction, but you still want to try to think of some ways to get a hold to kind of reclaim your stress or your anxiety or some other areas, then the self-care worksheet will be a good one for that. Of course, it goes without saying that our college is also home to the counseling psychology program, as well as the clinical mental health program, and as well as the doctoral counseling psychology program. So if any of those programs are of interest, or if any students in those programs would like to do a more deeper session on mental health in graduate school, I would love to hear from you. And in general, if you all have any questions, not even related to this topic, but just in general about grad school life or a campus resource that you don't know where to start, maybe even looking for, just drop us a line at cehdgss@louisville.edu, and we'll catch you next time on the Mini Monday workshop.